Hey friends, welcome back to Movies in a Bottle, where I'm very excited to ask you, what's your favorite scary movie? Well, my favorite slasher is Scream. I first want to set the stage by acknowledging, most people, except for my buddy Gavin, have already seen this movie, but regardless, I always strive to keep the spirit of the movie intact during my breakdowns, so to anyone who's here for the really awesome, really obscure trivia, trust that I'm choosing my words very carefully. But with most mysteries I cover here, expect a lot of that trivia to be backfilled once you have all of the pieces of the puzzle. And PSA, this series is definitely a love letter to horror, so the use of movie references and its meta-awareness is essential to the story, but for timing and pacing, I'll only be pointing out the really interesting movie name drops. But with all that out of the way, let's roll film. As we begin our terrifying tale, I want to quickly remind everyone that this movie is a very well executed whodunit, and most of the significant clues come from tiny interactions between characters, so trust that whatever I mention was deliberately included, no matter how irrelevant it might seem in the moment. The night was like any other in this small northern California town of Woodsboro. Our final girl, Casey Becker, was enjoying her evening alone watching movies, but when she was greeted by the familiar blue screen in between VHS tapes, she would receive a phone call from someone whose heinous crimes would leave this town permanently scarred. When Casey picks up the phone, the voice on the other end seems equal parts mysterious and intriguing, but with an unmistakable, sinister undertone. It's a wrong number, so she hangs up, but the wise guy calls back, so with slightly less patience, she hangs up again. Then after a very foreboding shot of the rope swing outside, Casey gets another call from her secret admirer. She's apprehensive about talking to this potentially dangerous person, but something about his voice is intriguing, and after overhearing popcorn popping, they start talking about movies, which seems innocuous enough, so they keep chatting. When Casey is asked the iconic question, "What's your favorite scary movie?" she answers Halloween, but the caller wants her to guess his favorite. She tosses out Nightmare on Elm Street, and the caller likes that movie because it's scary. Very relatably, Casey retorts that the first one is, but the rest suck. Side note, y'all should check out 3 Dream Warriors. It rocks. And yes, this movie was directed by Wes Craven, but that line was written by Kevin Williamson. Getting back on track, Casey humors the caller until he casually mentions that he wants to know her name so he knows who he's looking at. At this point, the final girl doesn't care how charming this dude sounded. She hangs up, but she gets the fright of her life whenever he calls again, viciously threatening her life if she hangs up again. The psycho on the other line says they're gonna play a game, and Casey's at DEFCON 1 after the caller refers to her as Blondie, confirming her worst fear that he really can see her. With terror surging through her veins, Casey locks all the doors in the house and hangs up, but she's nearly paralyzed with fear whenever the doorbell rings. She goes to call the police, but instead answers another timely phone call and is mockingly reminded that asking who's there is a death wish in scary movies. Casey pleads for this torture to end and unconvincingly threatens that her boyfriend Steve will come to her rescue. However, the poor girl has failed to notice the silhouette that's appeared in her backyard since she's last checked, but after being instructed to turn on the lights, she sees Steve gagged and bound to a chair. The monster on the phone reminds Casey that he's here to play a game, and through her uncontrollable sobbing, she's informed that her and Steve's fate will be left up to her knowledge on movie trivia. First, she correctly names the killer in Halloween for the bonus round, but sadly, she fails the arguably trick question of who's the killer in Friday the 13th, incorrectly naming Jason. The twisted caller on the other end is all too pleased to tell her that she's failed, but Casey angrily retorts that she saw the movie 20 goddamn times. However, her heart sinks whenever she's reminded Jason didn't show up until the sequel. The caller gives her the devastating news that her failure has cost Steve his life, and sure enough, she checks just moments later and he's disemboweled. However, the final girl is given a bonus round question, so the sinister voice forces her into a seemingly 50-50 wager to make it out alive. Is he at the patio doors, or is he at the front doors? She's understandably frozen, but a chair flying through the glass patio doors nearby forces Casey to run in terror. She grabs a knife from the kitchen and she hides until she sees her attacker run towards the front door to look for her. Casey uses her chance to sneak out the unsmashed patio doors nearby and hide. Slowly, the final girl gathers her courage to peek inside, and she sees the intruder all the way across the house. After a few agonizing moments, she peeks again, and he's still across the house, so Casey feels safe enough to crawl under the windows towards her parents' headlights approaching just down the road. Casey then goes to check the last set of windows before she's in the clear, and oh no, it's Ghostface! Well, actually, this was the one-shot director Wes Craven was behind the mask for, and Drew Barrymore accidentally socked him with the phone for real, before fleeing for her life, of course. But sadly, dear viewer, this is the part where I have to tell you Casey wasn't our final girl after all. Ghostface catches up, chokes her, then quickly raises the knife with one hand before plunging it into Casey. And if that wasn't vile enough in its own right, her parents arrive home just moments later to find their front door ajar, and then horrifically, they have to hear their daughter's final moments over their home phone as she's dragged away and left on display, hung up by her childhood rope swing. The director, Wes Craven, is a legendary director known not only for the Scream movies, but also for Nightmare on Elm Street and like a dozen other movies. However, he had originally turned down directing this movie, but changed his mind after Drew Barrymore signed on, who plays Casey. Then the two worked out an idea to do an homage to Janet Leigh in Psycho by leveraging Drew Barrymore's A-list celebrity status to falsely make it seem like she was going to be our final girl. Sorry for that misdirection, y'all. I also wanted to mention that there is a really huge clue as to who Ghostface is based on the attire of our main cast whenever we're introduced to them in a bit at the fountain. I'll revisit it later, along with all the other main clues and misdirections. Right afterwards, we're introduced to, possibly, our final girl, Sidney Prescott, and her rather promiscuous boyfriend, Billy Loomis, who snuck into her window late one night. After Sid reassures her dad that he didn't hear anyone sneak in, he reminds her about his conference this weekend, and he hits the hay. Billy eyeballs the door to make sure that the coast is clear, and then he proceeds to turn on some tunes to put the moves on his girlfriend. While jamming to a soft acoustic version of Don't Fear the Reaper by Gus Black, Billy compares their relationship to the edited-for-TV version of The Exorcist, like how all the good parts are cut out. More or less, Billy is sexually frustrated, and he describes how they started off hot and heavy 2 years ago, but for reasons they don't get into just yet, Billy feels that things have changed. And Mr. Suave rolled well enough on persuasion to get himself a little makeout session before he starts to get a little further than Sid is comfortable with, so she sends him home. But she does give him a quick PG-13 flash as a consolation prize for all the effort he went through. And fun fact, Billy Loomis is a reference to Dr. Samuel Loomis from Halloween, and Sam Loomis from Psycho before that. When Sidney goes to school at Woodsboro High the next morning, she's confused by all the police and reporters swarming the campus. But there's one reporter in particular, Gail Weathers, that seems to catch Sidney's attention, but her concentration is broken whenever her girly girl BFF Tatum pops up telling her what happened to Casey and Steve last night. Notably, Tatum catches herself as she starts to say that her cop brother Dewey said that this was the worst crime since something happened. The cops investigating the school, including Dewey, or Deputy Riley, are equally cryptic whenever they prepare to ask Sidney about last night and recall how her mom was involved in some well-known but unspeakable tragedy. Either way, like all the other students, Sid answers Sheriff Burke's questions and she moves on. Here is when we meet the rest of our wonderful cast of characters gathered around the school fountain. We already know Sidney, Billy, and Tatum, but here we also meet Stu, the lovable goofball, and Randy, the even more lovable smart friend. They're currently discussing suspects, and Tatum argues that it could be a woman, but Stu disagrees, citing the degree of violence. Sid just can't fathom how someone could gut another person, and Stu starts to answer, but Billy can tell his girlfriend is uncomfortable, so he shuts Stu up. Sid further reminds Stu to be more respectful by commenting how he used to date Casey, but Randy slides in with a stray to remind everyone how she dumped Stu for Steve. Then, only half joking, they accuse each other of being the killer, but Randy was working at the video store and Stu was with his girlfriend Tatum. Again, only half joking, Randy asks if that was before or after the slaying. Stu affirms that he didn't kill anyone, but Billy eyes him, pointing out that nobody said you did. After school, Sidney is feeling overwhelmed by all the police and reporters, so she calls Tatum and again alludes to her past tragedy by describing today as deja vu. So instead of staying home alone while her dad is away on business, the girls plan to have a sleepover at Tatum's and she promises to come pick Sidney up at 7 o'clock sharp. Sid gets her stuff ready for the weekend and she flips on the TV to pass the time, but all the channels are covering Casey and Steven's breaking stories, including one even hosted by Gail Weathers. Sid again can't help but to watch her, and here we learn the tragedy that people have been alluding to, about how Sidney's mom, Maureen, was brutally slain just last year. So yeah, that's definitely enough TV for now. Sid gets up and she shakes off the nerves and then pauses after she thought she heard something coming from her closet. But she remembers how she just opened that door before watching TV, so she waves it off and then takes a nap to pass the time until Tatum, hopefully, shows up at 7. Roger L. Jackson was intended to only be a placeholder voice for Ghostface during filming, but Wes Craven loved him so much, he kept it in the final cut. Jackson was also intentionally kept separate from the other cast, so the reactions to his voice would always be more genuine. And the guy looks like a total sweetheart in real life, so I can see how knowing him would take away from the fear factor a little bit. And I internally debated telling y'all this because it obliterates the fear factor from Ghostface, but Roger L. Jackson's second most famous role is Mojo Jojo from the Powerpuff Girls. Look, if I have to be cursed with that knowledge, so do you. Sidney is jolted awake by a phone call, and it's Tatum apologizing for being late. Only a few moments pass before the dreaded phone rings again, and we, the attentive audience, recognize Ghostface's voice instantly. However, Sidney is none the wiser and suspects the caller to be Randy because he compares everything that's happening to a movie, and he works at the video store. Unlike Casey, Sidney is quick to shut down the horror movie talk by criticizing their formulaic nature. How the girls always run upstairs instead of out the front door. Ghostface responds by ominously claiming that they aren't Randy, and that they're on her front porch. Sidney calls the killer's bluff and takes her mountain-sized cojones outside to find nobody there. When she tries to hang up, Ghostface lashes out again, threatening that Sidney will suffer the same fate as her mother. The gravity of the situation finally sets in, so she retreats inside, locking the door behind her. Then, as our final girl is scanning her front yard from the window, Ghostface emerges from the closet that she definitely should have checked on earlier. Suddenly, Sidney was thrust into a fight for her life, but she's quickly overpowered and has to watch as her would-be killer slowly raises the knife above his head with 2 hands to deliver the final blow. But perhaps he savored the moment just a bit too much because Sidney kicks him off, and then, to her credit, she tries to run out the front door before Ghostface routes her up the stairs because she doesn't have time to unlock the door. Our final girl uses the closet door as a way to barricade Ghostface from entering her room while she frantically uses her phone and computer to call for the police. After failing to break through the doors, Ghostface vanishes, but just as quickly, Billy Loomis appears in her window that he used to sneak in last time. He comforts his visibly distraught girlfriend, but her trust would be shattered whenever her knight in shining armor drops his cell phone. Remember, they were pretty rare in the mid-90s, so that's pretty suspicious. Naturally, she runs away from Billy, only to be met by Ghostface at the front door. Or, more accurately, Dewey holding up a Ghostface mask that he supposedly just found outside. But either way, Billy is hauled off to jail while vociferously proclaiming his innocence. Tatum finally arrives to find her best friend sitting in an ambulance, talking with cops. Sidney can't get away from there fast enough, so she's sent off with Tatum, and perfect timing too, because the Vulture, Gale Weathers, showed up looking for her next sensational hotline. Oh, and Gale's poor cameraman Kenny has to endure her wrath for not hustling with the camera, even though it wouldn't have made a difference either way. Over at the police station, Sidney was sitting with Dewey trying to track down her father, but for some reason or another, he isn't listed at the hotel he's supposed to be staying with. That's bizarre. In the next room over, Billy was being interrogated by Sheriff Burke, who was rightfully concerned not only over the cell phone, but how Billy snuck through Sidney's window 2 nights in a row now. So regardless of whatever excuses Billy has, the cops are forced to hold him until they can check the cell phone records from his dad's phone that he dropped. Okay, and I realize this is not the time or place, but somebody definitely needs to tell Dewey that that hat on his computer is not appropriate for the workplace. But sorry, I digress. Dewey had also been following up on the mask that he found outside, and unfortunately, he gives Sheriff Burke the bad news that tons of stores sell the Father Death costume, so tracking that down is gonna be impossible. At this point, Sidney is obviously exhausted, physically and emotionally. So when Tatum shows up, she embarrasses her brother by telling him that she's taking her friend home. The captain, however, doesn't stop her, but he does ask that she uses the side door to avoid the media frenzy out front. Meanwhile, the police had turned Gale away near the front door, so she thought she'd try her luck staking out the side door, and lo and behold, just as Dewey stepped away to get his car, Gale showed up bringing all kinds of attention to Sidney and Tatum. And I love this next moment. With absolutely zero tact, Gale tries to ambush Sidney with questions, so Tatum tries to play defense, but Sidney sarcastically defends the reporter instead, claiming that she's just doing her job. With more obvious sarcasm, Sid asks about Gale's book, but when the shameless reporter says she'll send her a copy, our badass final girl responds by giving Gale a well-deserved punch to the face. Shout out to the Heavy Spoilers channel for the great rundown on the origins of the Ghostface mask. It was created and sold by Funworld, and it was actually designed to be a mix of the face from Pink Floyd's The Wall album cover, Edward Munch's The Scream, and the ghost from the old Betty Boop cartoons. A producer found it while he was scouting locations, and later licensed it for the movie after they changed its name from the Peanut-Eyed Ghost to, of course, Ghostface. Although he's only called Ghostface once in the entire movie, but I'll point it out once we get there. At the sleepover, Tatum cathartically summarizes, "I'll send you a copy, bam, bitch went down." But sadly, Sid isn't out of the woods yet. She gets a call from the one and only Ghostface, who more or less is calling to taunt her for choosing the wrong suspect, and to promise to attack again soon. With a dark cloud once again hanging over Woodsboro, coupled with Sidney's recent attack, the news cycle can't resist reminding everyone how she was entangled in the last murder their town had seen when her mother was slain just a year ago. The news updates everyone how the witness Sidney testified against, Cotton Weary, is currently appealing his death sentence verdict. During breakfast at Tatum's, Dewey let Sid in on the bittersweet news Billy's phone records are clean, which means he's not the killer, but at the same time, that means the real Ghostface is definitely still at large. However, Officer Riley does add that they're still cross-referencing all the phone records from the county, but it'll take some time. And here we get one of the coolest homages ever. When Dewey drops Sidney off at school, a random reporter rushes Sid, but that random reporter was none other than Linda Blair, who played Reagan in The Exorcist. This movie is such a love letter to horror. Sidney sees Gail applying some cover makeup nearby, so she goes over to clear the air about everything going on between them, not just the punch from last night. We learn that Gail wrote a hugely successful book about Maureen's death, and while Sid thinks she came up with a lot of BS theories, Gail talked with Cotton and he maintained his innocence the whole time, claiming someone framed him. And for the first time since losing her mom last year, Sidney seems like she might be second-guessing what she saw that night, and even worse yet, Gail now openly suspects that what happened to Maureen and what's going on right now is actually related, and it appears like the only thing standing between Miss Weathers and even more book sales is finding proof. Sidney, Tatum, and Stu are hanging out at the lockers whenever Sid interrupts Stu using his girlfriend's mirror to ask if Billy is pissed, but in his chronically unserious nature, Stu jokes that he's more heartbroken for being brain to the Candyman. Suddenly, a couple of amoral students dressed as Ghostface run past Sid in the halls, so she gets overwhelmed again, and she needs to take a second to collect herself in the restroom, but whenever she rounds the corner in the hallway, bam, there's Billy. He immediately starts to defend his innocence, citing how the cop said he scared the guy off, so Sid assures him that she knows it wasn't him because of the call she got last night. Billy's eyes trail down the hallway for just a moment as he agrees the call proves it couldn't have been him, but the insensitive jerk can only think about picking up their intimacy conversation from the other night. Billy thinks that because he quickly got over his mom leaving his dad, she's had more than enough time to grieve and get back to getting busy, but Sid acutely points out that it'll be a year tomorrow that she lost her mom, and she storms off. This movie is loosely inspired by the tragic events of Danny Rolling, aka the Gainesville Ripper. Sparing you the gruesome details, he took the lives of 3 people from his hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana in 1989, before he went on his more infamous spree of ending the lives of 5 college students in Gainesville, Florida in the summer of 1990. The creator and writer of the Scream series, Kevin Williamson, was house-sitting for a friend whenever he was watching a TV special about the Gainesville Ripper, whenever he noticed that there was a window open that he didn't remember opening. The panic and fear that he felt from that moment was the catalyst that ultimately led to Scream. Very briefly, the principal rounded up the 2 pranksters running through the hallway dressed as Ghostface, and he wasted no time in expelling them on the spot. When they remarked that that's unfair, the principal thrust scissors towards their faces, countering fair would be leaving them like Casey for the world to see how desensitized they are. Sir? This is a Wendy. Back to Sidney. She can't even catch a break in the girls' room. She first overhears her classmates speculate on wild theories that range from her making up the attacks to her being the killer. Then they push the envelope even further by making disparaging comments about her mom's love life and claiming it made her snap. After those brats leave, Sidney thought she heard a noise, and unlike at her house, she actually checks it out this time by peering under the stalls, but she finds no one. However, just as she starts to leave, Ghostface slowly steps down from the toilet, then clumsily lunges at Sidney from the stall, so she slides under the sinks and runs away to safety. Elsewhere on the school grounds, Gail has started to work a new angle on her investigation by sweet-talking the young, naive Officer Dewey Riley in hopes that he'll be her man on the inside, so to speak. But their conversation is cut short by the principal canceling classes due to the recent events and announcing the police's citywide curfew of 9 o'clock in effect immediately. As Dewey leaves, he's clearly aware of what Gail is trying to do, but regardless, they do have some obvious chemistry going on. And not so fun fact, these 2, David Arquette and Courtney Cox, got married in real life in 1999 but divorced in 2013, which was an uncanny parallel to their on-screen relationship in this series. Back to our main quest, Stu catches up with Sidney and Tatum during the exodus of students, and he suggests they throw a house party to celebrate their impromptu school vacation. And Sid is initially hesitant, but after her BFF Tatum twists her arm, she relents, so Stu pumps his fist very enthusiastically. But we aren't done at school just yet. The principal is being lured around by some ding-dong-ditcher prankster, and at one point, he flings the door open, cursing towards Fred, the fedora and Christmas sweater-wearing janitor, who grumbles back to his boss, calling him a prick under his breath. And yes, that is clearly Wes Craven cameoing as Freddy Krueger, and I get the cameo and all, but Freddy did terrible things, especially to children, so Fred, the high school janitor, might be a little bit in poor taste, I don't know. Either way, Not even having the ability to employ a nightmarish god of dreams would be able to save the principal, but I'd be remiss not to mention that the principal is played by Henry Winkler, and whenever he checks out his closet, we can see his leather jacket from his happy days playing the Fonz. Sadly, he should have been checking behind his office door, where Ghostface was really waiting to end the man with a quick series of one-handed stabs. Afterwards, we briefly check on Sid and Tatum before the party, and their interaction with Gale must have had an impact on them because Tatum now seems convinced that Cotton Weary may very well be innocent after all. After considering that possibility, Sid voices the haunting realization that that would mean the real killer is still out there. But unbeknownst to her, out there turns out to be him eavesdropping like 20 feet away, and Tatum tells her friend to chill because she sounded like a Wes Carpenter movie. And Wes Carpenter is a little homage to the director of this movie, Wes Craven, and John Carpenter, who did Halloween, which was like the blueprint for this movie. Across town, Billy and Stu have plenty of time to kill before the party, so they go see their third amigo, Randy, who's working at the video store. Billy is browsing the horror section, so Stu and Randy, not so discreetly, start theorizing about suspects, and Randy is adamant that it's Billy, but Stu isn't convinced because the cops let him go. Regardless, Randy goes with Occam's razor and figures Billy's lashing out after Sid refused to sleep with him. Stu counters with his own theory that it's probably her dad because they haven't been able to find him, so Randy loses his patience and vocally explains what's obvious to him. Mr. Prescott is missing because he's already a goner. The police would be much better off if they followed the very simple formula, as seen in horror movies, and treated everybody like a suspect. Randy ends his rant by declaring Billy is the killer, and then bam, he runs right into the accused. Billy flips the script by accusing Randy instead, and surprisingly, he agrees that he would be a suspect too. Billy asks for his motive, and humoring him, Randy says motives are incidental, it's the millennium. Basically saying that you don't really need one anymore because the times have changed. At the top of this next scene is where the song Red Right Hand plays, which is in every Scream movie except for 4 for some reason, and in a super meta moment, Tatum, Dewey, and Sidney talk about how they might make a movie about all these events, and Sid thinks they might get someone like Tori Spelling to play her. Starting in Scream 2, they do an in-universe series of movies called Stab, and they're about these events, and Sidney is indeed played by Tori Spelling. Getting back to the investigation, Dewey gets an incredibly distressing update from Sheriff Burke. They got the phone records back, and all the calls made by Ghostface came from Mr. Prescott's phone. And worse yet, tomorrow is the anniversary of his wife's death. So now the plan is going to be putting all of their resources into finding him and making sure that he's the killer, and then they'll bring in Sid. And then we get an eerily long look at Sheriff Burke's shiny black boots as he stomps out a cigarette. Later that night, the lovable Officer Dewey takes his sister Tatum, and possibly our final girl Sidney, to Stu's house party and settle in because the last 42 minutes of this movie's total 1 hour and 51 minute runtime takes place here. Stu asks Tatum to grab him a beer, so she sarcastically dubs herself the beer wench before heading into the garage, while Stu invites Dewey and Gale inside. Gale isn't one to pass up a chance for a good scoop, but she doesn't fool Randy, who calls that she has a hidden camera from a mile away. Sidney is visibly uncomfortable with Gale being there, so she just quickly asks Dewey for an update on her dad, but he says that he's still missing. Meanwhile, Tatum had gone out to the garage where she would quickly encounter one of those annoying partygoers dressed as Ghostface. Tatum cleverly references I Spit on Your Grave by asking if they're making I Spit on Your Garage, and then, believe it or not, we hear the movie's only use of the name Ghostface whenever Tatum, while in character as a helpless victim, asks, "Please, Mr. Ghostface, let me live," so that she can be in the sequel. Only whenever Ghostface draws his signature hunting knife and slashes the poor girl's arm does she realize how truly grave her situation is. As expected, Tatum didn't stand a chance, so she tried to escape using the kitty door attached to the garage, but she got trapped and the killer raised the door until, tragically, Tatum's neck snapped. In a subtle bit of foreshadowing, Drop Dead Gorgeous by Republica played as Tatum entered the garage, and Rose McGowan apparently kept easily fitting through the pet door, so to make it look convincing, they had to nail her closed to the frame. Anywho, it's not long before Sid notices her bestie is missing, but when asking around, Billy jumpscares her and Stu by the front door. Billy gives his bro Stu a distinct look, so the generous party host offers to let Sid and Billy use his parents' room to talk privately, which Randy is not happy about, by the way. He is jealous. Real quick before we move on to the bedroom, we do see that Gale and cameraman Kenny's hidden camera operation is working from out in their news van, and they can see inside the living room, even though there's about a 30-second delay. So Billy and Sidney go upstairs, and after Billy checks the door, presumably to make sure they're alone, they talk seriously about their relationship, and Sid confesses to having conflicting feelings about her mom's secrets, but she wants to move forward past all that. Billy compares her situation to a movie, so Sid retorts that this isn't a movie. Mr. Suave back in the house counters that life is all one great big movie, but her problem is she can't choose a genre. Sid then proves to her boyfriend that she is ready to move forward by choosing the good old woohoo genre. And if you don't get that reference, you should play The Sims more. Meanwhile, downstairs, Randy is educating everyone on all things horror while watching John Carpenter's Halloween, no less, the movie that made the Scream Queen herself, Jamie Lee Curtis, a household name. The meathead dudes, however, just want to know when they get to see Jamie Lee's goods, so Randy reminds his fellow drunken partygoers how only virgins survive horror movies, per the rules of surviving said horror movies. But Randy nearly blows a gasket whenever no one knows the rules, so he stops the movie to passionately list them. 1. No sex. 2. No drugs or alcohol. And last but most importantly, never say you'll be right back, because you won't be right back. And then, to tempt fate, Stu comically announces that he'll be right back, while grabbing him and Randy some brews. Gail was also accidentally tempting fate just outside, because when Dewey invites her to check on a car hidden in some bushes down the road, she tells Kenny that she'll be right back. Back inside, Randy takes a phone call and the news of the principal's demise is making the rounds, so virtually all of the morbid partygoers leave to go check it out, even though Randy, ironically, reminds them that they're on the best part of the movie. Then the students nearly run Dewey and Gale over on their way to see the gruesome scene, but in the process of avoiding those speeding cars, the pair stumbles upon the hidden car the killer likely used to get here, and perhaps unsurprisingly to Dewey, he recognizes it as Mr. Prescott's car. Back to our final girl. After the deed, she quizzically asks Billy who he used his one phone call on in jail, and he says his dad. But Sid muses how using his one phone call on her would have been a clever way to get him off her suspect list. And personally, I'm not sure how Sidney's theory explains Billy using the Ghostface voice in jail, but I guess it's good to keep your head on a swivel, right? Regardless, Billy intensely locks eyes with his girlfriend, asking, "What do I have to do to prove I'm not the killer?" Sid whispers, "Oh my god," as a great revelation seemingly dawns on her, but then she yells, "Oh my god," as Ghostface appears again, holding his knife high above his head with both hands before delivering fatal blows to Billy. After Ghostface menacingly cleans the bright red blood from his blade, Sidney runs away, locking the doors behind her, but somehow Ghostface still cuts her off and keeps her from running down the stairs. Sidney barely escapes through the attic window, but notably, there was a doll that looked remarkably similar to the state Casey was left in. More importantly though, once Sid escapes, she's met by the tragic sight of Tatum still hanging in the garage door, so she runs over to Kenny in the news van. Together they watch on the hidden camera as Ghostface nearly ends Randy with his dreaded slow two-handed strike, so Kenny steps out of the side door to go to his rescue, but he remembers that 30-second delay a little too late, and the killer appears, slicing his neck. Sid only barely survived by squeezing past the cramped news equipment and running out the back doors of the van. And it's hard to say whether Ghostface was savoring the moment or hesitating, but he took way too long taking out Randy, so Randy went outside to check on Sidney. On a quick personal note, I'd be really curious to know what you think after Ghostface is revealed. Was he savoring the moment here, or was he perhaps hesitating? The quote-unquote responsible adults, Dewey and Gale, arrive back at the scene, and the cops start searching the house while the reporter goes to call for help. And she does get a call out to 911, but she completely freaks out after finding Kenny's remains, so she speeds down the driveway, almost pancaking Sidney and careening into a ditch. The final girl is starting to look pretty rough at this point, so she runs back to the house pleading for Dewey, but whenever she finds him on the porch, he collapses with a knife in his back. The killer chases her into Dewey's car, and Sid locks the door, but he has the keys, so all she can do is radio for more help before getting chased back into the house. The final girl frantically collects Dewey's gun, but whenever she turns around, she's met by Randy and Stu both accusing each other. Randy claiming that Stu killed Tatum, while Stu is claiming that Randy killed Billy. Not knowing who to trust, Sidney locks the doors on them both, and once inside, she finds Billy barely clinging to life. He convinces her to let him hold onto the gun to go chase the killers off the porch, so they unlock the door only to find Randy still frantically accusing Stu of being Ghostface. However, Billy quotes Anthony Perkins in Psycho saying, "We all go a little mad sometimes," before shooting Randy and revealing that he's doused in the same fake blood that they used in the movie Carrie. And to be clear, that's not trivia from narrator Rat. That's coming from Billy losing his mind and still referencing movies even during all this. Anyways, barely even processing what's going on, Sidney backs away from her ex-boyfriend right into Stu, but whenever she begs him for help, he holds up a voice changer and says, "Surprise, Sidney," in Ghostface's sinister voice. That's right. The big twist is that there have been two killers operating this whole time. Actually, between you and me, there was a third killer operating as the mastermind, but we wouldn't figure that out until Scream 3. The mask is too hot, I need a break. But hey, regardless of what I say happens to Stu soon, don't write him off from the series just yet, because years ago, Matthew Lillard said in an interview that he was paid to be the villain in Scream 3, but the project was scrapped after the Columbine tragedy. And I personally go into most new movies intentionally knowing as little as possible, so I won't be checking the comments on this video until after I see Scream 7, because I know the internet likes to spoil things. And hey, I think he might be coming back. Admittedly, I thought that for 5 and 6 too, but this time, I mean it. Also, Billy, played by Skeet Ulrich, almost ruined this movie before it came out, because he was doing an interview with Interview Magazine for a completely different movie, and they asked him what he's doing next, so he enthusiastically talked about his role as a serial killer in an upcoming horror movie. He realized his mistake almost immediately, and he called his publicist, and thankfully, they were able to get that interview pulled in time. Rewinding just a bit now that we know Randy was right about Stu, I wanted to give my 2 cents on that off-screen interaction. I believe Randy, who's definitely the smartest one in the group, found Tatum hanging from the garage door just like Sidney did. Then Randy pieced together that Stu must have seen Tatum after he mocked the rules and said, "I'll be right back," while getting bruised, but he never mentioned anything to anybody. The two lunatics make sure to take their sweet time referencing movies while tormenting Sidney with all of the details of their sadistic plans, including how they indeed framed Cotton Weary after slaying her mom. That leads us nicely into Billy's motive, which seems to take Stu even slightly off guard whenever he hears his partner in crime confess that this was all for revenge after Sidney's mom slept with Billy's dad, causing his mom to abandon their family. And keeping with their twisted movie theme, Stu takes great pleasure in reminding Sidney that she now has to die because she's no longer a virgin, but before that, they want her to appreciate the brilliance of their ending. At Billy's command, Stu leaves and returns with Mr. Prescott, still wearing that same exact outfit that he was in whenever he checked on Sidney earlier. And that's the time whenever Billy first snuck in and turned on the song, "Don't Fear the Reaper." The killers explain how they already made Mr. Prescott the prime suspect by using his phone for the Ghostface calls, and now that it's officially the anniversary of his wife's death, it'll look like he just snapped and ended everybody, including himself. Billy and Stu are gonna stab each other to make it seem like they were left for dead, when in fact, they're gonna be the only survivors. Although the two of them learn the hard way not to trust psychopaths and they stab each other too far, especially Billy, who sinks the blade really far into Stu. Then they have another problem. While monologuing, Gail Weathers made her heroic comeback and took Dewey's gun that Stu set down to get Mr. Prescott. Stu quickly defends that she looked dead, but no matter. Billy easily knocks her out and takes the gun because the reporter doesn't know how to take the safety off the firearm. During the scuffle, Stu notices that the final girl has escaped, and then Sidney turns the tables on them by calling them with a Ghostface voice changer to say that she's already called the cops and explained everything. The villains lose what little composure they had left as they realize their plan is unraveling, and before Stu possibly bleeds out, he confesses to Sidney over the phone that his motive, if you can call it that, was peer pressure. However, it's worth noting that Stu blamed peer pressure just so flippantly. I personally don't even think he has a motive, and that seems scarier to me. Sidney now has the element of surprise, so Billy has to go looking for her, but he gets distracted by Halloween still playing on TV, thanks Randy. So Sid, dressed as Ghostface, borrows a page from their book and lunges from the closet and stabs him in the chest with an umbrella twice, and then she tosses the gun to the side. I'm guessing she also didn't know how to use a firearm like Gail. 2 of the 3 onset injuries happened here. First, Skeet Ulrich, who plays Billy, accidentally threw the phone at Matthew Lillard, who plays Stu, because his hands were just covered in the slippery fake blood. Second, Skeet Ulrich really got stabbed by the umbrella because the stuntwoman couldn't really see through the mask and she missed the padding, and due to him having heart surgery as a child, he was in agonizing pain. And that's actually the horrifying take that we see in the final version of the movie, but I think it's fair because Wes Craven also used the take of him getting punched in the face by Drew Barrymore, so at least he's consistent. While Billy is down and out, Stu finds his second win and he charges Sidney, tackling her to the ground, claiming he's always had a thing for her. But as we know, Sid's a fighter, so she bites Stu and escapes before taking him out by dropping a TV on his head. Then freaking Randy gives Sidney the jump scare of her life, only for him to be punched out by Billy. As the final killer proceeds to choke out the final girl, he quickly raises the knife high with one hand before trying to plunge it into Sidney. That is until Gail shoots Billy at the last possible second. Randy, Gail, and Sidney are looking down on the foiled mastermind when Randy comments how this is the part where the supposedly dead bad guy comes back for one more scare, and then sure enough, Billy tries to, but Sidney, now with the gun in her hand, shoots his lights out, deciding that's not happening in her movie. I planted a ton of clues for the big reveal, so here's a recap followed by who each Ghostface killed. During the intro, Ghostface runs to the front door, which is seen open whenever the parents arrive, so that must have been to let his accomplice inside. 2. In the introduction of our main characters at the fountain, Billy and Stu are already seen wearing the same boots as Ghostface, and Billy shuts Stu up whenever he actually starts to explain how to gut someone to Sid. When Billy first sneaks into Sid's window, he really turned up the music so Stu could kidnap Mr. Prescott unnoticed because he's seen in the same outfit. When Billy suddenly appears at Stu's party, he gives his accomplice a "I opt Tatum" look, not "I need privacy" look. Whenever Billy was seen looking at the door before unlocking the romance option with Sid, he was really ensuring that Stu could enter to stage his death. Followed by the blood on the knife looks a little too bright, and there's even a squeak whenever Stu cleans it off. As far as who was behind the mask for each of the killings, I'm relying on their body language used whenever they're definitively revealed, such as how Stu is seen doing the classic overhead two-handed stab whenever he was staging Billy's death, and how Billy choked Sidney after revealing their motive, or lack thereof, in Stu's case, but that means Billy was Ghostface 1, having claimed Casey, the principal, and Tatum. Ghostface 2 was Stu, having killed Steven, Kenny, but failing to kill Randy. Again, let me know if you think that was hesitation because he hoped Randy would have left with everybody else, or if he was savoring the moment just a little too long. Now let's close this classic out. Even though Ghostface terrorized this town, things could have been far worse because at least Mr. Prescott and Dewey actually pulled through and survived their injuries. And as a little cherry on top, Gail gets a particularly happy ending by being the one to report firsthand on what she incorrectly assumes will go down as the darkest night in the history of Woodsboro. That's a wrap on Scream, but I have a couple of buzzer beater fun facts for you. First, this movie has a no thank you whatsoever in the credits to the Santa Rosa School District Governing Board, because they were originally going to film there, but they backed out of their verbal agreement right before filming. And I personally love that little fun fact because I've seen this movie over 20 goddamn times, but I never noticed that. Also, did you know that the use of caller ID tripled after this movie came out? I can't imagine why. But I hope you all really enjoyed this breakdown and learned something new. But I'll be right back with a video next week, so subscribe to stay tuned. But until then, y'all be good. Hey, you made it to the end. Remember, if you want to revisit any more of your favorite movies, check the links on screen, but otherwise, subscribe and I'll catch you for a new breakdown next week. Thanks.